I guess that being said then, Dr. Sarfati, we know the critics of young Earth creation scoff at the fact of a Genesis flood, since this is kind of where we're venturing into.
Yeah.
Dr. Sarfati, is a global flood consistent with the modern scientific data?
I think it's the best explanation of what we're finding. And it's interesting that when it comes to the planet Mars, they're usually quite happy to talk about global floods on Mars. And they talk about a Noachian epoch, which is named after a place named after Noah. Okay, so happy with global flooding on Mars, which hasn't got a drop of liquid water, but don't want to believe it on Earth, which is 70% covered by water. And in fact, more than that, if the mountains were flattened down and the ocean bottoms raised, so everything was totally smooth, a smooth ball, the water in the ocean today would cover the whole thing to a depth of about 3 kilometers or about 2 miles. So there is plenty of water to flood the Earth. All you have to do is have the surface a bit more even than it is now. So, I mean, that's one evidence. Well, how could the flood have covered Mount Everest? Well, Everest didn't exist before the flood. It grew up very rapidly after the flood, you see. So there's some of the objections don't really understand the biblical flood model at all. Okay, when it comes to evidence, there's 3 basic lines of evidence. Okay, one is the huge extent of the layers. You can actually match them across whole continents and even match them with things on other continents. So if you're going to have a huge effect like a layer, you must have a huge cause as well. The cause must also be global in extent if the effect is global in extent, like these very long, wide layers. The other thing is the layers must have formed very rapidly. Otherwise, how can you have fossils in the first place? Have you ever seen fossil roadkill?
Right, no.
That's the thing. To get a fossil, you have to bury it quickly. And this, again, recent research that's been published in our website and our magazine shows that you have to bury something deeply to get a fossil. Otherwise, it'll get eaten by scavengers. It would bloat and float and disintegrate. So the skeleton falls apart. Even on the ocean bottom, you don't find whales and things on the ocean bottom because they get eaten by bone-eating worms called ossidax, which will eat the bones. When you go to the tragedy of the Titanic, when they finally went down there, no human bodies were found down there. They're long gone. They found some shoes which were clearly been worn by one of the victims, but there was no body to speak of there. See, so to get a fossil, millions of years is the enemy once again. You have to bury it really quickly so it actually doesn't bloat and float and it stays where it is. And then cements and replaces. You see, the other thing about just recent discovery, to bury the thing, you have to have something porous, because what happens during decomposition produces a lot of yucky stuff that helps to turn the whole thing into mush. And what the sediment does is absorb some of that yucky stuff before it turns this thing into mush. So the upshot of this, it has to be buried by something really quickly and to stop it bloating and floating and stopping it from turning into mush. You've got all these things that have to be done. So again, when you see these huge dinosaurs and massive graveyards, you know there must have been a very rapid burial. You've caught dinosaurs in the middle of a fight. You've caught some of these sea creatures in the middle of giving birth.
Right, I was just going to point that out.
It's poor ichthyosaur we often use. Was it lying on the ocean bottom for millions of years, slowly giving birth? Right. Now, I've heard of long, difficult labour. I think that's going a bit far for me.
Right.
The last thing, I've got wide extent of the layers, rapid formation of the layers, but also very little time between the layers. Because on the surface of layers, you often see footprints or ripple drop marks, even raindrop marks. I mean, think about if you left a footprint outside, how long is that footprint going to last, do you think?
Yeah, not long.
Yeah.
Not very long, right? So the thing is, if you're getting footprints, you can't have millions of years between the layer of the footprints and the next layer that buried them. Otherwise, the footprints would be long gone.
Exactly.
Right.
So we've got, like in Queensland, Australia, my state in Australia, they found there's a dinosaur national monument which has 3,000 dinosaur tracks uncovered. Now, they had to uncover them by lifting up the rock, getting rid of the top rock layers, tons and tons of the rock over on the top of it. But as soon as they exposed them, the footprints started to wear away. Even though they're in rock, they had something to wear away, so they pulled a protective shed over it. No, that wasn't enough. They're now in a building, a conservation building that controls temperature, humidity, it stops running water, stops animals, stops humans going over it. So it's a really fragile, had to be protected by this elaborate conservation building. They want to tell me that these footprints were laid down and millions of years later the next layer came and buried them.
Yeah.
No, there must be very little time between the laying of the footprints and the actual burial of them that cemented them in place.
Right.
So
It's
very wide, rapidly formed, and very no time between the layers. That adds up to basically a very quick event that laid down these layers pretty much in 1 year.
right. It's strong indication of sudden and rapid burial, even just given what you were talking about with the fossils we find of animals giving birth, fish being eaten. So, and I find it funny, Matt. I know you were just going to ask a question, but it just came to mind because we constantly hear the critics, evolutionists say that young Earth creation doesn't make testable predictions. But from my understanding, there was a prediction made by Dr. John Baumgartner on the flood model, and it was confirmed. I believe they found massive slabs of cold slabs of rock, I believe, at the base of the mantle based on
Oh yeah, that's a very important thing because Dr. Baumgartner's flood model is catastrophic plate tectonics, and you have this runaway subduction effect. You've got one of the tectonic plates going beneath another. That's called subduction. You see, if this was done over millions of years, the subducted plates down the bottom would have warmed up to the temperature of the surrounding mantle rock. But in fact, when you take the temperature, it's actually quite cold. It's 1,000 degrees or so colder, which means it hasn't had time to warm up yet. Which means it must have been in place very quickly and not that long ago, like say 4,500 years ago, and not millions of years ago. Otherwise, it certainly would have warmed up to the temperature of the surrounding mantle rock. That's a very important prediction, that.
Right. I was fascinated by that prediction because, like you said, if it descended into the deep, hot mantle, then obviously those enormous slabs of cool rock should have been melted or just much warmer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, very good. And Dr. Humphreys has made predictions, tests or predictions about the planetary field, magnetic field of Uranus and Neptune, which were basically confirmed when Voyager went past them and measured the magnetic fields. They were basically in what Dr. Humphreys predicted, which was way out of line with what evolutionists were predicting.
Exactly.
They were successful. Then I want to just note a contradiction in what evolutionists claim. They will claim creation is not scientists because it's not falsifiable or testable, and then the next breath they say, well, creation's been proven wrong in this and that area.
Right.
Which is it?
Well, which is it exactly?
Another